Everyone, welcome to the Midtown Scholar Bookstore's virtual event series. My name is Alex Brubaker. I'm the manager here at the Scholar, and as always, I am live in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania at the bookstore. Whether you're joining us on Crowdcast or Facebook Live or even YouTube Live, hope everyone's okay out there. Hope you're safe. Hope you're hanging in there. Thanks so much for tuning in. It's really nice to connect virtually here as we've been doing over the past month plus. Hopefully you're not getting sick of me quite yet. We really hope you're enjoying this event series. I know we are. And we hope we've been able to introduce you to some authors and topics that have been engaging, thoughtful, and inspiring. And I think the event today will check all three boxes. At this time, I'd like to encourage you to purchase David's new book if you haven't yet done so. Purchasing his book through us helps support the author, our staff, this event series, and of course, you get a good book out of it. We're offering free media mail shipping in the US to make the price more reasonable for everyone. So if you click the green button below, it's right below my face. It says purchase a copy. That will direct you to our website to purchase a new copy of David's book. If you're watching this through Facebook Live or YouTube Live, just look in the comments section and you should see we've provided a link there as well. Or simply head to midtownscholar.com. And thank you for your support, everyone. Now this evening, we're very honored to welcome business writer David Sax and Harrisburg's own SARA BOZICH. SARA BOZICH has been the go-to source for living locally for nearly 2 decades. She started her self-titled blog more than 15 years ago, where she's dedicated to helping her readers get the most out of the greater Harrisburg area. Using the blog as the platform to launch her marketing agency, SARA offers events, promotion, and social media services. SARA's other adventures include work on the film Port in PA, a feature-length documentary on Pennsylvania's beer industry, co-founder and co-organizer of Harrisburg Beer Week, and proud mom to her toddler, Bo. David Sax is a writer, reporter, and speaker who specializes in business and culture. His previous books, The Revenge of Analog, was a #1 Washington Post bestseller, was selected as one of Michiko Kakutani's top 10 books of 2016 for the New York Times, and has been translated into 6 languages. He is the author of Save the Deli, which won a James Beard Award, and The Tastemakers. He lives in Toronto. Of course, the book we are here for this evening is titled The Soul of an Entrepreneur, Work and Life Beyond the Startup Myth. And I'll just read you one blurb that I really enjoyed. It's from A.J. Jacobs. He says of the book, quote, "You may think business books are not for you. That's why you need to read this one." David Sax takes us on a tour of real, non-digital businesses, from beauty salons to Syrian bakeries, that is both enlightening and inspiring. If this book doesn't make you want to start a company, you probably already own one. So at this time, I'm going to welcome onto the screen Sarah and David, and they'll take it from here.
Ta-da! Yeah. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, David, for joining us. I'm excited to chat with you today. I think I'm really excited to dive into some of these topics. So I briefed you briefly before we went live here that you and I are the same age and sort of started similarly with as writers and have both found ways to evolve that. But, you know, it was only a couple of years ago that people started referring to me as a CEO or an entrepreneur. And I have to say I was not very comfortable with that term. In fact, I'm not sure that I still am. So I'm really curious to hear about how you define entrepreneurship and really what inspired you to write this story.
Yeah, that's a really great question. Thank you for being here and coming out and bringing such a colorful background and sweat to this as well. You know, that question of what an entrepreneur is and how do you define an entrepreneur was kind of the central one that drove this book. It started out as this kind of curiosity I had about what it meant to work for yourself. And, you know, I've always worked for myself. The last job I had was like a ski instructor when I was 19. I've always been freelance. I've always been independent. I've always worked for myself, always from home, you know, never employing anyone. So the current situation is terrifying, but not that different from me. I'm wearing my sweatpants, which is my work pants. So nothing new.
I know that.
Amen. But a couple of years ago, I noticed something going on. And that was, you know, the word entrepreneur all of a sudden had this new weight to it. Like, we were talking about entrepreneurs more in the media and culture and politics and education and entrepreneurship. It was sort of romanticized and venerated in this way. And it you know, it was all this talk about the golden age of entrepreneurs, the golden age of startups. There's never been a better time to be an entrepreneur. There's never been an easier time to be an entrepreneur. The millennials were forecast as the generation that was going to be the most entrepreneurials, in a century. And so I started looking into that. That was the book I wanted to write about, this golden age of entrepreneurship. But when I began digging and looking at the actual economic statistics, I saw the opposite. That outside of that world of Silicon Valley style startups, outside of the few thousand companies that you hear about that get venture capital funding, or the ones that sort of get on the cover of magazines, entrepreneurship in the United States was declining. There were fewer people starting fewer businesses and going out to work for themselves than the year we were born, like half the number when Reagan came into office today. There were fewer people starting businesses, fewer businesses that were employing people. Those businesses weren't growing as much. It just showed this marked decline. And so I was interested in how, in one sense, were we elevating the entrepreneur to such an exalted cultural status, revering people like Elon Musk as the sort of new heroes of our age and romanticizing starting up. But on the other sense, the average entrepreneur, most entrepreneurs were sort of declining. And so I started out my research, and I was just talking to professors and experts and economists. And I remember the second or third interview I did, I said, well, I'm writing a book about what it means to be an entrepreneur, something like that. I didn't really know what it was about or what it was called. And the gentleman said, well, what do you mean by entrepreneur? And I was like, well, an entrepreneur. He's like, well, how do you define that? And I was like, well, I guess it's someone who's their own boss. And he's like, well, that's your definition. What he let me know is that there is no one accepted definition of an entrepreneur. I mean, there's something in the dictionary, but everyone's definition is different. And that definition varies wildly by who you are and what your circumstances are and what you believe and your position and your background and so on. And so what I started seeing was that the definition of an entrepreneur is actually the thing that really matters the most. And I began every interview at the beginning of it asking someone how you define an entrepreneur, as you did. So the definition that I use is actually the original definition. It's this guy. He was an economist in the early 18th century in France, Richard Cantillon, an Irish-French economist, who wrote a book about a series of essays on the economy and how economies work in 1730. Didn't get it published, died in 1750, and his book was published a year later. And it's the first time that the term entrepreneur is really defined in this way. And this goes on to sort of set the stage for it. And he basically says an entrepreneur there are two types of people in the world of work. There's someone who works for fixed wages, who has a boss and has a job and has a salary, and there are entrepreneurs. That is anyone who works for an unfixed wage, who has the risk that entails, right? They have the freedom to sort of do the type of work they believe, and they work for the hope of some better tomorrow, but they bear the risk of that. That to me encompasses everyone. And Cantillon said, this is everyone from the wealthy merchant launching ships across oceans and in some hope of some great big payoff with this investment, or the landowner or the farmer or the beggar in the street. They're all entrepreneurs because they work for unfixed wages. And I think that broader definition is the one that I identify with, and ultimately is the one at the end of this book that I really came to say, this is what it means, because everything else that you use to define it, oh, well, it's anyone who's innovative. Okay, well, what does that mean? How do you define who's innovative? How do you say that? Well, it's someone who's successful. Okay, well, what's the marker of success? Is it a number? Is it the number of jobs they create? Is it the size of their company? They're so subjective, and they're wrapped around politics and ideology, and they're exclusionary. They exclude more and more entrepreneurs. And in the Silicon Valley world, you or I don't count as entrepreneurs. Someone who owns a local business in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania doesn't count. I mean, anyone outside of the Hershey family or the guy who founded it, Mr. Hershey, is not an entrepreneur in Harrisburg, according to the sort of Silicon Valley startup definition. And so that's problematic, because when you start excluding people, you create a bigger issue of inequality of ideas and inequality of opportunity. That was a really long answer. I'll be short.
I liked it. All about the long answers. So
you could just take a break and go check on the kid after eating dinner. I don't know.
So obviously the people you've talked to in the book, and I know the subjects do vary, but many of them and the people that I know and identify as entrepreneurs locally are those who do own small businesses. And I would tell you that I feel like I've seen a rise, at least in the last few years, as opposed to a decline. But maybe Harrisburg tends to be a microcosm of, and a bit of an anomaly anyway. So the question then, I guess, is, why are people starting businesses? Or if you're noticing this decline, why are they not starting businesses?
It's not really clear why the overall rate of entrepreneurship has declined over the decades. There's all sorts of different theories around it, but nothing's sort of been proven. The one thing that's known is that, in America and in most of the world, in most industries and sectors, there's increased concentration. A few big companies increasingly dominate every sector. Technology, we see it with Amazon and Google and Apple and Microsoft and so on. You see it in the energy sector, in the travel sector. There's fewer airlines. They just keep swallowing each other up. And so as you see that concentration of wealth and the economies of scale, the ability to sort of compete becomes more difficult. It's harder for people to become entrepreneurs and sort of get an edge up in that area. In other areas, you've seen that, and then you've seen the opposite, right? You work in the beer business a lot. The craft beer story is a wonderful story of micro entrepreneurship, microbreweries, that came and completely upended an industry that was dominated by monopolies, Molson Coors, Labatt, InBev, Sapporo. I mean, it's like 5 companies that controlled the entire global beer market. And all of a sudden now you have thousands and thousands of breweries in every single community that have been popping up over the past, 15, 20 years. And with ingenuity and innovation and just like good old fashioned entrepreneurial hustle, they were like, hey, guess what? Like, you can have all sorts of different products and they could be in your backyard. And if you like 20 different types of beer, we're going to make 20 different types of beer. And we're going to do a million things. And we don't have to worry about sending our beer all over the continent and our shareholder value and all that sort of stuff, because we're just here to make beer and sell it to you. And so I think the reason why people start that is the same reason why, coming out of this crisis, or even where we are, like, people are even starting businesses now. You mentioned that you were wearing a sweatshirt from a friend's company, shout it out, Everyday Friday Clothing Co.
Right.
That we started last week, which would seem like a insane time to start a business. But I like to say that entrepreneurship is a perfectly illogical act, right? Like, it is rationally irrational. It statistically on the surface never makes sense to be an entrepreneur. You're always better off on an aggregate getting a job and working your way up like you're in some, 1950s corporation or some Japanese conglomerate. But, that doesn't stop people from having an idea and wanting to pursue it. And that desire to pursue that idea is so strong in people that they weigh the risk and they say, well, the risk to me not doing this is actually greater than the risk of doing it.
So you mentioned that word hustle. A lot of people have a side hustle, or they've been encouraged, especially in this pandemic, to work on a side hustle. And while I do have this one small example of someone who started this clothing company, are you seeing, I imagine you keep in touch with some of the people that you interviewed. Are you seeing, a shift? Are you seeing people take these side hustles and move them into, a more, I guess, a chance to work completely on their own, take that side hustle full-time, potentially, even in this pandemic?
I think you're seeing that a lot of that out of necessity. There are people who are losing their jobs, or the income from their business or their current job is declining, and they are figuring out, okay, well, this thing that I was doing, this is what I actually need to put my energy into, because it's giving the opportunity for growth at a time when I need something. What I've seen from the people who I interviewed in the book, the entrepreneurs that owned and operated the businesses that varied wildly, is they're applying every bit of their entrepreneurial ingenuity to find what can work within their business, and be incredibly nimble and on their feet. I mean, that's the advantage of being an entrepreneur. It's the one thing every entrepreneur has, is they have the freedom to act, and they can do it without having to go and ask permission from someone else. And so my friend Aduna Weinert, who I wrote about in the book, she runs her family's winery in Argentina called Bodega Cavasta Weinert. If I could put a purchase button for their wine right now, I would just do it. It's delicious. You can get it in the United States. And, she's used to flying around the world and doing wine tasting. She was actually supposed to be in Canada when this whole thing went down, and doing wine tasting for importers and restaurants and suppliers. So she started doing virtual wine tastings online with her different importers around the world. And you can find all these videos as she talks about the winery and the wines and how they're made and does the tasting. And it's doing something. It's driving interest. It's teaching people about the product. Other people have completely shifted their businesses to do takeout only. Tracy Abalski, who runs a bakery in Rockaway Beach, New York, her business, it was a coffee shop, and she did a lot of takeout. Now it's 100% takeout. So what's going to work for takeout? What are the menu items that work for takeout that don't work for eating in? How can she, move that business in that way to be able to serve her customers and keep them safe and keep herself safe? So you're seeing, a lot of ingenuity. You're seeing people launch other businesses that are related to this. And I think it's a terrible and terrifying time to be an entrepreneur, or a human, I guess. But, there is something that is energizing and exciting about it. I mean, I think back to the first week of this, right? April 15th, I came up here to my mother-in-law's house that's 2 hours outside of Toronto with my two kids and my wife and all the flour we could grab from the house and the yeast. And, that first week I was frozen. It was just kind of this feeling of powerlessness and dread, as we went on walks and just wondered and looked at the news. And I was checking my bank account and I'm like, okay, this is enough money to live on for X many months, and then I'm really screwed. And about a week into it, I remember waking up one day and it's like, okay, you have this book coming out. It's probably not going to sell like you were thinking it was going to sell, but you never knew how it was going to sell anyways. You're not going to go on book tour. You're not going to get to go to Harrisburg, or the other cities you're going to go to. You're not going to get to go on these radio shows and things. Like, what can you do? You, David, I don't know why I'm speaking in the third person. What can I do? I'm not even drinking tonight. Water. What can I do? And I started taking action. I was like, okay, I'm going to talk to that person about that podcast. I'm going to see if I can sort of work with that and sell them. Like, let's see if we can pivot on that. I pitched this idea to the New York Times. That's not going to work. Let me think of this other idea. I'm going to sell them on that. What else can I write? Who else can I do? I'm going to harass these 5 people. I'm going to start taking action because that's what I can do. And I don't have to ask my publisher permission for that. And when I did that, it wasn't like money started rolling in, and it hasn't largely, but it gave me back that sense of, I guess, action, or the sense of empowerment. And I think that's the thing that, again, for entrepreneurs, there's something intoxicating in that, right? It feeds our sense of self-worth and our identity in a big way. And so that's what you're seeing entrepreneurs doing now. And for the people who have to become entrepreneurs because they may have lost their job and there are no other jobs to replace them, that's going to be one of the greatest benefits. It's going to be the money that they make to, feed their families and keep a roof over their head. But a lot of it is going to be also that sense of empowerment that comes with it.
Did you find that there were any consistent themes or, keys to, I don't want to use the word success, but maybe to get that start in becoming an entrepreneur?
That's interesting, right? Right now, or let's say March 10th, before all this happened, March 5th, really. About 10% of Americans became entrepreneurs in some way. 1 out of 10 people went and worked for themselves. And most people didn't, because it was more secure and stable and to work in something else. So they didn't have that desire to do it. So what separates that 1 in 10? And there's been thousands of studies of like psychological studies and scanning people's brains and MRIs and, there was one study I quoted in the book. It's amazing. It got all sorts of press. It was like researchers at the University of Colorado theorized that a toxoplasma found in cat feces could spur people to become entrepreneurs, because a higher number of people who are entrepreneurs, have this in their blood. Like, okay.
Had cats as pets.
Yes. This is what the scientists are working on, instead of thinking about a vaccine 2 years ago to coronaviruses. So that's how we're in the situation. Like, the idea that cat shit is at the root of this or something else. The reality is, what does it take to start? I think it just takes starting as an entrepreneur. I think it's just taking that first step and then taking that second step. But I think one of the downsides of the startup myth, the idea that you need venture capital backing to start something, the idea, that Shark Tank puts in, it's like, well, you need a business plan and you need a team and you need a clear trajectory and you need to, then go find some rich investor and get their money and get their okay, and then you go out and do your thing. Most businesses and most entrepreneurs do not start that way. You were telling me yourself. I asked you how you became an entrepreneur. You're like, well, it kind of happened into it. I mean, that was the same with me. I was applying for jobs at 22, straight out of university, to be a foreign correspondent. People were like, no, I'm 22, you idiot kid, like, get out of here. And like, you could just be a freelancer. Just start doing it. And if you could sell enough articles, you can live. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess I'll start. Why not? And that's what it is for some people. I mean, for most people, it's not this grand plan. That's a luxury that most of us don't have. And so, starting is the hard part at the beginning, right? It's hard throughout in all sorts of ways. But advice to start, I think it's the same piece of advice that I would give to someone all along the way is, what is your reason for doing it? If your reason is to make billions of dollars, good luck, but it's probably not going to happen. If your reason is to become this great famous inventor, again, good luck, but the odds are it's not going to happen. It's the same as me writing a book with the goal of becoming a #1 New York Times bestseller. It's a wonderful dream, but hasn't happened to me yet. When they said #1 Washington Post bestseller, I just want to clarify what that actually meant. Last year or 2 years ago, I saw that my book, which had been out for like 2 years, was suddenly a #1 Washington Post bestseller in the Washington, D.C. area. They don't put that on the sticker on the book. Mm-hmm. And it happened for 1 week, and that was it. Nobody knows why. Someone must have bought like 300 copies of the book in D.C. and given them out as a party. I never had any idea why. Nobody was able to explain it. I'll take it to the grave. But, what is the reason that you became an entrepreneur? What is the reason that someone does? Everyone's reason is different. And it's rarely about, I want to get rich. I want to make a ton of money. It's often, I had an idea. There was something I really loved to do. I have a family and I want to spend more time with them. I work in my family business and I want to take it to the next level and renew that legacy. I want to do something for my community. I love beer and I just couldn't find the beer that I loved and I want to make it. That reason is the thing that gets entrepreneurs started, but it's also the thing that keeps them going through this. And in a time like this, what I've been telling entrepreneurs is I've been speaking to them across this vast Zoomscape of life, is the thing that's going to get you through this, aside from whatever government loans you can get and whatever smart ways you can think of your business, like, you got to stay in touch with what that reason is for being an entrepreneur, because that is the thing that is going to root you in it and get you through these difficult times. And so that's what I'd say. That's the truth of it.
I think some of the scrappiness that people like you and me get from being freelancers.
Scrappiness, Pennsylvania.
Crappiness. But I also know that you have a great quote from your father in the beginning of this book. And he also is an entrepreneur. So I'd love you to talk about this story about your dad. And then really, I would like to ask you why, though, you decided that you wanted to, maybe I just want to work in my sweatpants, I think was part of it, which is the irony of now where we all do, but like, it was like,
wearing pants
from home. But I'm curious to know why for you. I mean, I don't think it took me a longer time to realize that.
Yeah. I
wanted to work for myself. And it wasn't so much about an working for someone else necessarily. Enough talking about me. It just sort of happened. But tell me the story about your dad and this quote in the beginning of your book.
Yeah. So this is let me read the quote to you. Do that. It's my own finger. What the hell is the quote? So these are the two quotes at the beginning of the book. The epigraph is it's now. Give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. Unknown. A lot of people have told me it's Jesus, but actually I looked it up. It's not in the Bible. What my dad's quote is, if you lose your job and need to start a business, reading Elon Musk's biography isn't going to teach you shit. And we were driving somewhere and I was telling him about the book I was working on and writing. And I said, it's about the startup myth and how like we venerate this and how real entrepreneurship is not like that. And he's like, yeah. Elon Musk biography isn't going to teach you shit. But every time I talk to someone, they say, oh, I want to be Elon Musk. He's my hero. Like, ridiculous. Clearly even more ridiculous today. But from my dad, this was such a great telling thing and actually still relevant today. My dad grew up in Montreal. His father was an entrepreneur in what we call the schmutta business, which is the sort of Jewish garment business of Montreal. He was the son of immigrants. And his father was never a successful entrepreneur. He had a bunch of different companies, a sweater factory, a dress company, a women's wear, accessory salon. They didn't take off or they failed for different reasons. And my father was always driven, to work hard. He went to law school and he did his year of associate or articling, as we call it here in Canada, at a big firm in Toronto, very prim, proper old money firm. And they're like, we're not going to hire you, Sax. You're too entrepreneurial. Like they knew, no way is this guy a model employee. And he started his own thing. He started his own firm. He hustled, found clients, found a niche, had a partner. They worked together. The partner moved to Florida. He kept on going by himself. And he's always worked for himself, by himself, forever. And he's been very successful at what he's done. And he really values his identity as an entrepreneur. And to him, that's what it's about. It's about that sense of independence. It's about that sense of freedom of just going out and doing it. And so, he was the person that said, well, why are you trying to apply to all these radio stations and magazines? Like, you want to be a writer, you want to be a journalist, go out and do it. You don't have to ask permission for anyone. And I think that was the thing that got me into it. That was that sort of start of like, oh yeah, I guess, sure, I could go and work for myself. And now I could never work for anyone. I mean, it's just, the idea is impossible. You'll pull these sweatpants out of my cold, dead legs.
Same.
Sit in an office and wear a shirt and like, oh, hi, Susan. How was your weekend? Kill me. And there's a lot of give up for that, right? I give up, the certainty of pay and the hierarchy and the ladder and the experience and wonderful other things like colleagues and mentors and, a social environment to have. I know a lot of people who've gone and worked for themselves and found it very difficult after working for others for years. But I think it's funny. There is an entrepreneurial value and a legacy in families where people are entrepreneurs. It gets passed down as a lifestyle that's desirable. And, My wife is an entrepreneur. Her parents were entrepreneurs. My brother is an entrepreneur. There was one person in my family who had a regular job. She just got fired last week. And she's like, well, this is it. I'm becoming an entrepreneur. Go, Stacy. So we so often reduce being an entrepreneur down to this Elon Musk. Oh, to be an entrepreneur, you have to be a singular, brilliant genius with the absolute will of God and a firm belief in Ayn Rand and libertarian beliefs. And, if anyone doesn't believe in you, you have to crush them. And it's like, that's not what entrepreneurs are like. There are our sisters and our mothers and our brothers and our friends and our neighbors and our communities. And they are anyone who decides that they're going to accept the risk in exchange for the freedom to work for themselves in whatever way that is, whether it's working for themselves from home in their wonderful, thank God it's Friday sweatpants or whatever. Can't see the crest.
Oh, everyday Friday.
Everyday Friday. More like everyday Monday these days. Wednesday. Just one endless Wednesday. To someone who starts a company and grows that company into a large, medium, whatever business. I mean, when people say most businesses are small businesses, you have to understand the definition of a small business by the Small Business Administration is something like anything under 500 employees. It encompasses 95% of the businesses in the country and pretty much around the world, right? Most big companies are family firms. Our belief in what an entrepreneur is and the entrepreneurs that matter is so different from the reality of that, which is people who look like you and me and own hair salons and bakeries and breweries and, various other businesses that you interact with every day.
It's interesting. Someone asked me the other day about how I got started because we're in a similar market or a similar industry in the sense that another writer, different skill set, some overlap, but by no means really a competitor. And he's worked for, we'll just say a firm. I don't remember right now, but he's close to retirement and he's interested in creating his own business. So he wanted to know how I had done it. And of course I sort of explained, this scrappiness, this freelancing for so long and eventually reaching a point where it was time to take the leap. Now I had a lower risk in some cases. I was married to someone with good health insurance. That was like I'm
in Canada, so that's just every time I hear that.
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, right, your country.
And he said, oh well, he was in a good, felt like he was in a good space with his retirement, but he was just so afraid of it failing. And it kind of confounded me because I thought, well, we're in an industry that's pretty low overhead, right? We're in our home offices. You need your laptop.
Sweatpants don't cost that much.
Sweatpants, right? You're fine. And I just thought, well, you just do it, right? You work. It's like you had said earlier about like the ways that you are going to, what you can do right now to try to push forth your business, even in a time like this. So after that little soliloquy, I just do have one more question for you. And then I want to see what the audience has for us.
Yes, we have 4 questions at least.
Oh, fantastic. We talked a little bit before about what businesses are doing now and the pivoting that we're seeing. And I'm curious to know how you think that might change the shape of some of these businesses post-pandemic. I know when I've talked to some breweries about some of the new things and restaurants who are like offering delivery when they didn't prior, I've asked them, do you think you would do this, once the world goes back to semi-normal? And most have said yes, but I know for some people that means different things. So I'm curious to hear what you think about that or have heard from your friends and colleagues.
I think it's everybody taking things day by day, right? What can work and what's sustainable. I mean, so much is just pure survival. I've talked to some restaurant owners I know, and they're like, yeah, we're doing delivery. We're breaking even on it. It's literally just so we can afford to pay the rent, keep the lights on, maybe hold on to some of our key staff. They don't want to do it. And other people who are realizing, actually, this is something that's really great for us, like a bookstore, like Midtown Scholar, like they're probably going to keep doing some version of this event. Maybe they'll just film it with a camera in the store. You and I will hopefully be talking in person, and they'll be able to put it up on the web and continue with the buy button and drive more sales that way. Or they'll have built out their e-commerce platform, and so now that's, you know, something that's going to continue growing, and they'll invest in that. I think you'll see a lot of good ideas that come out of this, you know, continue if it works for people, right? If it makes sense financially, and also if it's what they want to do. You know, there's a lot of people who have turned to making masks if they had a clothing store or a tailoring business. Like, you know, once it's over, they're not going to keep making masks.
Did you have a feeling?
Maybe.
I lied about the last question. Did you feel at any point when this first happened that you were going to maybe go work for somebody else? Did you ever think, okay, well now I gotta do something. I gotta get a real job when the quarantine happened?
Oh God, no. I mean, the best thing about being an entrepreneur is nobody can fire you. Right? I don't worry about losing my job because I don't have a job. And I have the freedom to sort of act on my own. So no, I don't think I'm completely unemployable.
All right. Thanks, David. Thanks, Sarah. We're gonna get to some audience questions here. So if you have a question for David or Sarah, just feel free to fire them down below. It's the ask a question button.
It's in the purchase the soul of an entrepreneur box. You got to add your credit card info in to ask a question.
All right. So this first question is from Cher. She says, do you consider gig workers entrepreneurs? If so, do you have any concerns that entrepreneurs at this level are being exploited by Uber, Lyft, etc.?
That's a really good question, and one I've been asked a lot. There are some people who consider them freelancers. They are freelance and entrepreneur in, I think, legal entity only. What we've seen over the past months and years, whether we're talking about gig workers who are sort of temporary contract workers at an Amazon fulfillment center or some other contract site, or the Uber driver or the seamless delivery person or one TaskRabbit or whatever is, they bear the risk of entrepreneurship. They bear the risk of the uncertain wage, but none of the freedom, right? They have no ability to change the way they do their job, and they have no way to, you know, change the amount of money they're going to make or the work they're going to do outside of the rules of the software. They're employees in everything but name only. And that's why there's literally like dozens of lawsuits that are going to Supreme Courts all over the land that are saying, we're not freelancers, we are employees. You just don't want to call us that because you have to pay us more. So I don't think that they are. The other group of people that call themselves entrepreneurs or referred to as entrepreneurs, and I personally don't see them in the same category, are, you know, the corporate entrepreneur or the intrapreneur or the entrepreneur in residence, which is a paid salaried executive who has the word entrepreneur on their business card, may have been an entrepreneur at another time. But if you have an office and a boss and a contract that ties you in employment to that place, again, entrepreneur name only.
This next question is from Jay. They say, what role do colleges and universities play in training the next generation of entrepreneurs?
That's a great question, Jay. What's interesting is that, you know, over the past 30 or so years, entrepreneurship education and entrepreneurship studies has been one of the fastest growing fields of study in colleges and universities in the United States and around the world. In, I think it was like 1984, there was like 200 and something courses on entrepreneurship, just classes around the US. And the last count in like 2008 or 10 was something like 3,000. It's probably like 6,000 today. There are entire colleges dedicated to it. There are majors. You can study it everywhere. I think the downside to that is that the lesson that's being taught and the type of entrepreneurship that's being taught is very much along the lines of the startup myth, right? You have venture capitalists who are part of campus life and we're recruiting students, and it's the same sort of pitch your startup competition and we'll give you funding and you can join our incubator and accelerator. But again, that only really focuses on one type of business and one type of entrepreneur. And those entrepreneurs also tend to be young, male, and white, which excludes, a huge chunk of the population, including minority women, who are the fastest growing group of entrepreneurs in the US. So there's been a lot of call for change in that, and people saying that, entrepreneurship education needs to broaden out and reflect a far greater diversity of the reality of what being an entrepreneur is, studying how to run a family business or start a lifestyle business, rather than, a fast growing disruptive business is the only way that's taught. So it's great that there is a growth in entrepreneurship education. But there are other places like your college. Thank you, Jay. That are doing it. Actually, I think the community colleges are doing a better job than most of the universities with this.
This next question is from Bill, and Sarah, feel free to jump on this as well, but we'll go to David first. Bill asks, do you have any comments on the impact of local, state, and federal regulation on entrepreneurial businesses, balancing protecting the public versus stifling new small businesses?
Do I? What I love is that every friend of mine, regardless of their political background, when they become an entrepreneur, become like a little bit of a libertarian. They all hate paying taxes and regulations. And you see that, so much of the regulation is weighted on the side of larger companies, and entrepreneurs and small businesses don't have large lobbyists to influence that. So you hear about crazy regulations and things, $10,000 fee to license a hair braider. That is, punitive. On the other hand, I am not an Ayn Rand, libertarian, Koch brothers advocate of like government's got to stay out of everybody's back and no business should be regulated and, all regulation's bad. I mean, that is, in its own way, a dangerous thing. But every place is different. Every society is unique in that sense. Sarah, you could speak more to the Harrisburg region than.
Yeah, I would guess that this is a question largely in reference to current times. Right now, there seems to be a real split between people who support what our governor is doing in keeping our state most primarily closed, and small business owners who are struggling. What I guess I really take issue with is I choose to believe that we are all trying to do our best here, our local and state government as well, and that it is their number one goal to keep people as healthy as possible. I don't think anyone's trying to ruin anyone's business or life except to keep people, healthy and alive as long as they can. So I don't envy the governor or any of our local elected officials who have to make these kinds of decisions, because when you're serving a vast population like this, it cannot be easy to try to meet everyone's needs. So I really feel for all the small businesses that are struggling right now, that are not open, that are not able to have something to pivot to, or just simply, must remain closed for the time being. And I just, I hope people can follow health regulations as much as possible, and that we can be past this as soon as possible. That's really all I can sort of say about that. But I do believe that these things are made in the best interests of the public and individuals.
This next question is from, I believe their name is Aduna. They say, when you were writing the book, you traveled around some countries for your interviews. Could you say there are trends that you could pick out in what entrepreneurship means for each country or culture?
Aduna, who's a friend of mine and is the star of chapter 7, I want to say, the one I talked about, who owns the winery. So thank you, Aduna. I traveled around mostly the United States and Canada, but I went to Argentina to interview not just Aduna, but other people who owned and worked in their families' wineries in a region called Mendoza. Look, there are entrepreneurs in every corner of the world, right? There are people who work for themselves in every country. I mean, I was reading an article in The Economist last week about something like 50% of the North Korean economy is entirely run by the sort of informal underground black market of entrepreneurs just like buying and selling stuff in order to survive. This is human behavior that goes back to the beginnings of kind of an organized society. Someone's like, oh, I have this thing and I can take it to the market and sell it, or I'll trade it with you. I mean, that's its essential thing. And so the idea of, stamping it down doesn't go anywhere. And I think what I've loved and what kind of got me interested in this is, when you go and talk to people around the world, the entrepreneurs are everywhere, and their stories, their motivations, it is incredibly universal. And the thing that I found really interesting is, I interviewed people in this book who were, winery owners in Argentina, Syrian refugees who, fled across war zones and landed in Canada with nothing and opened up restaurants, people who were working in their fourth generation family business outside Philadelphia doing advanced manufacturing and defense contracting, and who, had been very successful, but very sort of tied to their values. People in Silicon Valley who owned large companies and were working on this sort of cutting edge technology. And regardless of their background or their size or how much money they made or what their ambitions were, they all viewed themselves in a similar way as entrepreneurs. And I think that's the thing. It is a very universal thing. The circumstances are different wherever you are, and that's economic and cultural, obviously. I think there's a value of the entrepreneur in a place like the United States that really is unique in the world. It's really kind of foundational to the culture and the myth of the United States. It's not my dog.
It's fine.
I don't even know. My kids they're making noise, but not those noise.
I'm like 5 minutes away from my kids shouting too, but
yeah. Wrap it up when the kids shout. And so I think it is this universal human thing, right? Wherever someone sees an opportunity and decides to act on it, you have entrepreneurs. And I think that's that universal thing. That's why immigrants, they see it as this natural thing. And rates of entrepreneurship among immigrants are higher than the general population because, already you have someone who's taking initiative by making the choice and taking the action, the risk to leave their home and the certainty of what's there for an uncertain future. And they are able to apply their skills in a place where, none of the advantages that they had at home are there. And yet they do it. And I think that speaks to the sort of universal human spirit, if you will, of entrepreneurs.
This next question is from Jess. They say, in the Harrisburg area, there are an amazing number of Asian cuisine restaurants. Sarah, I believe you can attest to that as well. When you're writing this book, did you speak to the entrepreneurial families who created those restaurants facing the obstacles of business success and also English as a second language? What feeds that drive for success? And then as a part B question, is American cuisine and entrepreneurship frequently seen overseas, like beyond McDonald's and Starbucks?
Yeah. Okay. I haven't eaten at the Chinese restaurants of Harrisburg. I wish I did when I went there. But, in the book, I write about, the second chapter is about immigrant businesses and the immigrant entrepreneur and their ability to start over. And this is something you see all over the world. I mean, I had a friend who did aid work and NGO work, and he was in Chad, which is like the second poorest country in the world in Africa. And he said, he's like, the only businesses outside of like oil companies and like gun running was like Chinese and Italian restaurants. You will find a Chinese restaurant anywhere in the world. And language isn't a barrier. Like none of these things are a barrier enough to prevent that entrepreneurship from happening. So in the book, I focused on Syrian immigrants and refugees in Toronto, my hometown, who had arrived in the past couple of years fleeing the civil war and had started businesses. And some of them had arrived with, the actual like $20 in their pocket and built up, a baklava bakery or a shawarma restaurant or something else, one sale at a time, scrapping and saving and doing it. And I think a lot of it is driven by necessity, right? They don't have the contacts, they don't have money, their degrees and their prior experience isn't applicable or isn't accepted, or they face, racism and prejudice where they are. And food is something that's universal. If you can cook something tasty wherever you are, you'll probably do okay. And so these people did that. They overcame the language barriers, and they overcame the stereotypes, and they overcame all the other barriers that were there, and they made a go of it. And for them, it was equally as important to do that, to establish their new identity in this new place, than it was just to sort of make a dollar. And so I think that's something you see all over the world, and you do see it with Americans in other places. You go to a surf town in Mexico, there's always like some guy like, oh, hey man, I'm from California, I moved here 20 years ago, I got married, and like now I have this burger stand. At various different ends of the spectrum. And I think that's it's something I think that suits that immigrant life quite well, because you're untethered, and this is something you can actually latch yourself onto. I remember there was a gentleman that I spoke to for the book. His name's Kevin Dahi. He's Syrian, lived for many years in Dubai and worked in marketing and like for big global ad firms. Successful guy. Moved to Toronto for a global ad firm job, but decided he wanted to make a distillery that made Arak, which is a sort of Middle Eastern liquor, kind of like ouzo, the Greek ouzo, like a licorice anisette flavor, but very popular in sort of Lebanese, Syrian feasts. And he started this distillery in like a industrial warehouse in the suburbs of Toronto. And I went out there and talked to him, and I was, why is this important? Why do you do this? Right? You had a great job, you were successful, you have family. He said, I did this to root my kids here. I was like, what do you mean? He said, we don't have any family in this country. We moved here 6 years ago. My kids are born here, but I don't want them to ever think that they can just pick up and go back to Syria or move to United Arab Emirates. I want them to be Canadian. And if I have this business, they're going to be rooted in that. They're going to be here. And this brings me to, my friend Aduna. Her father, she grew up in Brazil. Her father's Brazilian, but he moved to Argentina because he started this winery. And Aduna moved away from the family business for years and was living in Brazil, and the winery brought her back. It was the roots. The business, forms its own roots. And I think so many entrepreneurs are tied to that and tied to their identity in that. And so I think that's, probably the strongest thing for these immigrant restaurants and businesses that you see in Harrisburg and everywhere. Rambling answer.
This is a great question, an on-the-fly question that said, it's from Andrea. They say, it came up in this interview how an American entrepreneur needs to consider their health insurance options, and you as a Canadian do not. Have you seen ways this freedom plays out in greater creativity and risk in Canada?
It's interesting. This has been studied a lot. Statistically, you would expect that a country like Sweden or Canada, would have vastly higher rates of entrepreneurship because of this. That doesn't seem to be the case. One, healthcare is just one aspect of, someone's life and financial calculations, and there's all the other things that go along with that. So it's inconclusive whether it sort of changes that. So that's from a statistical perspective. Here's what I know. Nobody I know here in Canada has ever said to me, well, I was able to do this because my wife or my husband or my partner has healthcare. No one has ever said, well, I can't start a business because I'm not going to have healthcare and I'm worried about being sick. No one, right? It's not something that factors into the decision. It's not something that we ever think of. And thankfully it won't be. Whereas my friends in the United States, that is a genuine concern. I have had friends who stopped their lives as entrepreneurs, stopped being freelancers, left their businesses in order to take jobs because they needed the insurance. That was the deciding factor in what they were doing. Didn't go with who they were marrying. It hasn't gone to that extreme yet.
advice.
Yeah, it doesn't, so it's just something that you don't think about. I always have trouble explaining this to Americans. It is literally not something that enters into your mind. It's like you worrying that there will be pavement on the roads. You do not consider it. And so it's just one risk that's taken away from you as an entrepreneur, and a tremendous one, right? We're talking about health and life, especially in this day and age. It's something that you don't have to consider. The rest of the risks are still there, but it certainly makes it an easier process. That's for sure. So thank you. Thanks for asking that.
Dennis would like to know, how do you determine when to ask for help from other people in the conduct of your business? And Sarah, if you want to chime in on this one as well.
That's a wonderful question. Let me ask it briefly. I think this is the thing that entrepreneurs really need, and especially at a time like this, right? Because when you bear that risk, you're bearing it alone, and the loneliness of being an entrepreneur, the loneliness of bearing the risk on your shoulders and psychologically is profound, and it can have drastic consequences: depression, anxiety, suicide, divorce, spousal abuse. All these sorts of things can be fed by the feeling that you are alone. No one understands what you're going through, and not having an outlet. And so I think one of the most important things that we need in any country, in any society, and especially now at a time when pretty much every entrepreneur is going through real existential crisis, is the ability to speak out and say, look, I need help. I might need help of, how do I save my business? What do I do? How do I figure out, how to deal with this government loan program that's going to save me? Or how can I pivot my thing? I want to move into sweatpants. I'm moving out of fine suits. Who can I talk to? And I think a lot of entrepreneurs are just reluctant to do that because it's a sign of weakness, right? It's a kill or be killed thing. I remember one writer once was like, well, do you ever like help out other writers? I know I'm competition. I was like, competition? What the fuck are you talking about? Like, what are we, like, fighting to the death for like a $1 a word for some crappy magazine, man? Like, I'll have coffee. I'll tell you how to do it. You're not going to take money out of my mouth. I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on these calls, but it's crowd.
You did it.
You did it.
Unrated crowdcast. We'll delete that. Bring it back. And so I think that's something that's really, really, really essential. You can do it with friends, you can do it with family, you can do it with entrepreneurs. There are great organizations locally that are probably doing it that Sarah's going to talk to about. There's a great national organization called 1 Million Cups, which is put on by the Kauffman Foundation in Kansas City. It's the sort of national foundation around entrepreneurship, and it's like a support communities for entrepreneurs. You go and meet once a month, and now it's online. But it really is, knowing that you're not alone and having people to talk to about that. It's one of the most essential things. So I'm so glad you asked that. But Sarah, please.
I was never good at asking for help. And even when I brought on a staffer, was really bad at delegating anything to him until I had a baby, and then there was like no choice left. But this is a story I think you'll appreciate, David. I just met, before all of this happened, I was hosting an event called A Morning and Mixer with one of my clients. And it's a networking event. And I met this woman who had started her business doing errands for other people. So while not meant for just the entrepreneur, though certainly she could fill roles for you. But basically, if you have, an elderly relative that needs a grocery run, like they basically would do anything for a flat fee. And she just created her entire business. I believe she has a partner or two, or at least staff people, and they will do any level of task. It could be a one-time thing. It could be a weekly thing. And I thought it was brilliant. What a sort of meta to this answer, I guess, because it's help creating a business to help people who have their own businesses. But I thought it was really phenomenal. And immediately, as soon as I met her, I thought, I need your card. I'm certain there are ways that I'm going to be able to utilize you and your services in the future. So I thought that was really cool. Outside of that, I'm no expert. I'm like not a business expert at all. Again, I'm just like flying by the seat of my pants here. Happened into entrepreneurship. But but I have tried to get better about realizing what my strengths are and what they are not. And when I am faced with something that I know is not one of my strengths, or after giving it the old college try, connecting with someone who may be an expert in that field and then asking for, assistance, help, usually asking, offering to trade services, if, I can't afford to pay or something like that, in order to get the help that I need.
So we're at an hour, so we have to wrap up here. I have just one more question for the both of you, and then I'll let you plug anything else you want to plug before we wrap up. So I personally am kind of interested in this concept of failure, and we've talked about it a little bit. David, you said when this pandemic went down, you had all these like, how do you pivot, and you're going to try to get something in the New York Times or a podcast. Sarah, you've mentioned a couple things as well, but can you tell me, there's a lot of success stories there with entrepreneurship, but there's also a lot of failures. Can you talk to me personally about how you like embrace or pivot from like failing? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's all about the pivot. I think anyway, when I started doing, having happened into this job, there were certain things that I did well. Like I'm a decent writer. I write well. I can communicate okay. And that not being a good example of it. But, when I decided that I was going to go full time for myself, that first year, my rule was I am just going to say yes to everything. So it was whatever freelance job, whatever odd job. And I had some not good fits. I will say that. Things that I will never do again. It was not the right task, but not the right job for me at all. But also as times change, I work in social media. So it's, adapting to these things, knowing again, strengths and weaknesses, learning when I have to, and also trying to read the greater room. What are people interested in? What do they want from me too? And then just trying to sort of pivot that to what also I enjoy doing, or, and it's a work in progress. Like, when I rebranded last year, it was under the SARA BOZICH events, #1 promotion and social media. And like that first events part, like that's pretty much done for this year. And maybe it is for the future, or at least for a good chunk of time. I don't know. So there will be some pivoting as I move along here too. And there already has been.
Yeah, I think, I wrote a whole chapter on the nature of failure in the book, right? And I think that the mythology is that failing's good. Everyone needs to fail. You fail upward. First of all, failure sucks. It's terrible. And for the entrepreneur, the buck stops with you. So you can't be like, oh, Susan, accounting messed up, or corporate, what are you going to do? It's on you. And if you fail, you can blame yourself and fall down a hole of self-pity. And that, again, is a very dangerous spiral to lead down that can lead to all those serious problems that we talked about before. In a situation like we're in, the bar that's going to go bankrupt next month because they still have to pay their rent and they can't open and they can't do home delivery of Jello shots or whatever, is failing for reasons that are entirely outside of the control of, this is a once in a century or more black swan event that nobody foresaw and nobody could predict. And even I hear that like people who bought pandemic insurance aren't even getting paid out. So thanks, insurance companies. So what do you do, right? What can you do? One is you have to not embrace failure, but accept that sometimes things don't work. And that might be on a daily basis. Oh, this idea I had didn't work. I pitched this idea to the New York Times and they said no, like that happened today. That sucks. It hurts me right here. What do? Do I just sit there and nurture that hurt? Or do I say, okay, well, the only thing I can do as an entrepreneur is figure out what to do next. That's it. That's my only option. And that is the only way you sort of move beyond failure. Because if you dwell in it, what did I do? How could I have done it better? You start wrapping up your own sense of self in the failure. My book didn't succeed therefore I'm a failure. Therefore David is not good enough. But no, the book didn't succeed because the book didn't succeed. But the book is not me. The business is not you. You know, if your business goes under, even in the best of times, you're still the person you were, and that doesn't mean you're a failure. So what can you do next? I was watching a documentary last night, which I recommend as wonderful light viewing in this time, called the making of Motown. And it was about the making of, Hitsville, USA. And they were interviewing Barry Gordy, and he was talking about all the different businesses he started before he started Hitsville, USA Records. Like he had a shoe shine business and this repair business. And then he opened a record store. The record store was terrible. He wouldn't sell R&B. He would only sell jazz records. And his family was like leading entrepreneurs in Detroit. And it was from that he got to where he was, but it wasn't like, well, I had to fail to get there. I'm sure he would have loved if his record store had done really well. But then we wouldn't have had Martha and the Vandellas. Play us out.
All right. David Sax, SARA BOZICH, thank you so much for joining us on our live stream series. The book is The Soul of an Entrepreneur. Do you have it with you, David? Do you want to hold it up?
I have 2 copies.
Yeah, hold them up. So click the green button below us. It's below our faces. It says purchase The Soul of an Entrepreneur. That'll direct you to our website, free media mail shipping in the US. Look at that. It's a great book. So again, thank you both. Thank you to our viewers for coming out. Thank you for your questions. I'll give it to you, David and Sarah. Anything else you want to plug or last word?
Sarah?
Thank you guys for being here. SARABOZICH.com. That's all I got.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure. Thank you for having me. It's been great to talk with you all. And, I'm sure there's a number of entrepreneurs in the audience, as well as my friend Aduna, an entrepreneur in the audience all the way from Argentina. This time is going to be rough, and it will define a lot of us of who we are. Just remember that you have the ability to act, you have the ability to do something, and you're entrepreneurs. You are. And so remember why you are.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Stay safe. See you guys.
Bye. Thank you.